Hey everybody, this is John from MTG Next coming at you with another deck guide. This time, Modern Humans, a deck long time in coming. Used to be a staple of the Modern format, now it's making a comeback in a different form. That being the mono-white Shining Shoal variant, but we'll talk about this, the 5-color version that historically has been the most powerful, in an Azorius build that has also popped up every now and again in recent note. So, Humans, much like other tribal decks, has suffered in the post-Modern Horizons 2 meta. The Unholy Heat, Fury, Solitude, Leyline Binding, etc. meta. So, most of these tribal decks, when they pop up again, whether it be Merfolk, whether it be Humans now, have found ways to adapt, at least temporarily, to the meta. And the way this deck has decided to adapt is a card from Kamigawa, the original Kamigawa block, Shining Shoal. Now, normally you see these cards in very broken situations. You see, is it Disrupting Shoal? Or the Red Shoal was used as a, may have been Punishing Shoal, was used, no, Blazing Shoal, sorry, was used in with infect creatures to be one-shot kills with Progenitus, pitching a 10-mana thing, giving creature +10/+10. Nourishing Shoal, generally used in the Neo brand combo deck as a way to refill up on life to continue drawing cards with Gristle brand. Shining Shoal, this one isn't quite as abusive, but still has some utility. You may exile a wild card instead of paying X from your hand, so next, X damage that a source of your choice would deal to you or creatures you control is dealt to any target instead. This allows you to redirect Fury damages, Unholy Heat, Fury, more Fury. Basically, it's an anti-Fury card, but can also redirect bolts, creature damage, etc. Can redirect it to your opponent's face, one of your opponent's creatures, one of your creatures if you had some way to, reflect it back at your opponent, like a card like Boros Reckoner, which that's a whole other story. But this is primarily a tech the card deck has adapted. When it first came out, they were also playing Chancellor of the Annex, which puts a force spike effect on your opponent's first spell if it's in their opening hand. And it's a good pitch card, but kind of middling overall. So some of the variants that we've been taking a look at lately have decided to take advantage of other pitch cards. First one, Ameria's Call. Now, Ameria's Call kind of sucks to take 3 damage from your white source, but pitches to your Solitudes, pitches to your Nourishing Shoals, pitches to your Force of Virtue that we'll get to in a minute. And if the game goes really long, you might cast it, give all your creatures indestructible, and make 2/2 Angels. Pretty decent upside for a pseudo land. Solitude, you're playing Modern Horizons 2 Modern. You need Modern Horizons 2 cards. It's a removal spell, something Humans decks have kind of struggled with, as they always had to play things like Path to Exile, or Brutal Cathar, or Skyclave Apparition, or, effects like that. So, works quite nicely with the decks trying to do, other than giving your opponent life. That part sucks, but if you're getting an 8/8 Murktide out of the way, more power to you. Rest of the deck, a surprising number of the Hate Bear cards are Humans. Shocker, right? So, Esper Sentinel. Been annoying control mages and Murktide mages since the day it was printed. Oh, another Modern Horizons 2 card. Shocker. Sanctifier and Vec. Main deck hate for certain decks. Underworld Breach. Good against any of the red decks, especially if you're not going out of your way to damage yourself to cast it. Good against Scam. Good against Breach. Okay against card decks like Dredge. Middling against Murktide, but annoying for them, especially since you're playing it main deck. Thalia. Taxes all your opponent's spells. You're really not playing any spells other than Shining Shoal and Force of Virtue, so kind of negligible for what you're doing. And then, of course, Adeline, the big hitter of the deck, really helps you go wide. Pumps your Thalia's lieutenants. It's X4, which means it doesn't die to bolt. So, pretty solid pressure overall. Rest of the thing rounding out the set, Champion the Parish, A card the Pioneer version does not have access to, but is very powerful. It grows very quickly. Thalia's Lieutenant, Champion the Parish with buffing the humans that are already in play, giving them +1/+1 counters. Hopeful Initiate takes advantage of all those counters you put on your creatures, allowing you to blow up artifacts and enchantments, while also having training, so this thing can grow on its own. So pretty solid 1-drop overall. And then finally, Force of Virtue. Not sure how this one plays out in theory. Obviously, it pumps your team. It's one of the Force cards. It's probably the least played of the Forces, other than maybe the Black Force, which only exile. I think it destroys creatures then for the battlefield this turn. But I don't even know what the Red Force does, to be honest with you. So, okay, it may not be the worst Force in the world, but Force of Virtue allows you to create an Anthem effect during your opponent's turn out of nowhere. It can also be cast for Flash, so gives your creatures +1/+1. Is a way to use your cards, especially if Shining Shoal isn't relevant in matchups, say against blue-white control or something. And obviously, 4 copies of Cavern of Souls, good against counter spells. Mutavault helps you pressure your opponent. Aganjo, both of them being relevant. One preventing damage to legendary creatures. The other one allows you to potentially be a spell and kill your opponent's creatures in combat. So overall, pretty solid additions to the deck. Sideboard, Chalices, the drill. These are for Cascade decks. Unlicensed Services, Graveyard Nonsense, Filigree Silex, Ratchet Bomb effectively. March of Otherworldly Light allows you to destroy problematic creatures, enchantments, etc. Draenith Magistrate. Opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. Stops Cascade. Kind of middling against everything else. Doesn't really stop everything like creativity or any of that, but good against Cascade along with your Chalices. Destroy Evil gives you a split card. Destroy annoying enchantment your opponent might have. Though I can't really think of any that humans really particularly cares about unless you're up against Enchantress or something, but mainly this is here for destroy target creature toughness 4 or greater. And Cathar's Commando, another way to blow up artifacts or enchantments. So, Urza's Saga would be a good one to blow up with Destroy Evil. And then Cathar Commando, obviously, just a way to blow up artifacts and enchantments, a nice way to have on a utility body. This version, a little bit different, but a lot of the same characters, a lot of the same curve here. Really the only huge difference in the main deck is knowing a Peacekeeper as another way to disrupt your opponent. Very similar to the old Kitesail Freebooter or Meddling Mage effects. Taxes your opponent, if you know your opponent has a card that you care about. Say they have a Fury in hand or something, or a Supreme Verdict, this causes that to be more expensive, etc. And then activated abilities of cards in play can be more expensive, so you can make your opponent's man lands more difficult to use, Planeswalkers, etc. Overall, a nice piece of annoying tech, and I'm not really necessarily sure if I'm sold on Force of Virtue as a way to buff your team. The sideboard, a lot of the same things. This version has the Monarch Aspirant in the main deck as opposed to the Sanctifiers. It's perfectly reasonable, adds to the pressure. In game 1, you're really all about pressure. Then you can bring in your hate cards. Containment Priest, if a non-token creature went onto the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile it instead. Very good against any type of Reanimator. Very good against any type of Evoke Elementals. Very good against any type of Indomitable Creativity, etc. Plus the fact that it has Flash, can catch your opponent out of nowhere. Draenith Magistrate, your Cascade Hate, Sanctifier and Vec, the drill. And then 1 copy of Lorna of the Third Path. Whenever it enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. And then you and target opponent can each draw a card. Maybe if you had Spirit of the Labyrinth in the deck, that would be relevant in terms of the second ability. And I guess you could start drawing cards if you really want your opponent to have cards. But, probably mainly here to blow up artifacts and enchantments. Now, this is the humans deck that when most people played Modern, that you would kind of see. This was 5-color humans, Ether Vial, all the rainbow lands, just jam every single powerful human you could jam into the thing. You started out with Ether Vial and Noble Hierarch, making it easier to cast your spells. Champion the Parish as your primary beater. Then you got into Thalia and Thalia's Lieutenant, You got Phantasmal Image to copy all of your great things. You got Kitesail Freebooter to disrupt your opponent's spells. Meddling Mage along with Kitesail Freebooter allows you to lock your opponent out of casting relevant spells. Thalia Heretic Cathar could disrupt your opponent's creatures and non-basic lands, really being a nuisance. Ranger Captain, this could be a silence on a stick, also going and finding a 1-drop. Reflector Mage, just annoying all the way around for your opponent's creatures, endlessly bouncing things like Death Shadows and Tarmogoyfs, and so this deck was very good at annoying people. Chemball, very good at taxing your opponent if they're casting non-creature spells, makes decks like Burn and stuff miserable for them. Mantis Rider, this was kind of your closing beater of a flyer. Obviously, this deck took a huge hit from the printing of specifically Fury. Then the sideboard, man, you had to play mostly colorless cards because all of your rainbow lands only really cast humans. So you get to play things like Damping Sphere for, Storm decks and Tron and that kind of nonsense, although it's really kind of gone down in stock. Pithing Needle, shutting down annoying permanents like Planeswalkers and stuff. Cage, shutting down any type of graveyard nonsense or Collected Company decks. Teague could come in, even though it wasn't a human, could shut down things like Supreme Verdict, Farewell, that kind of stuff. Lavinia, very good Cascade Hate. Dismembers as removal spells. Deafening Silence, very good against any deck trying to cast, Cascade cards, etc. Worship, good against decks like Burn or other creature decks. Warlock Champion, just a nightmare for decks like Scam and stuff, getting a little bit of life against decks like Burn. Skyclave Apparition is removal spells, and then Magistrate we've already kind of covered. Now, this is the version when I talk about humans, especially as a Burn player, that I was typically playing against. This deck would be a very difficult matchup for decks like Burn because you have a bunch of targeted removal. Other cards that they would sometimes have, cards like Unsettled Mariner, etc. So this deck tried really hard to hang on, but just could not compete with all of the new hate coming out of the set. Hence why you're seeing the adaptation of the Shoal, whatchamacallit? I wanted to call it Nourishing Shoal, Shining Shoal, but this was the humans deck for probably a good 2, 3, 4 year run between before Modern Horizons 1 was printed and through, I think, right before Modern Horizons 2. So, anywho, we have one more type to cover of humans decks. And this is kind of the hybridization of the two decks that we've kind of referred to. Now, obviously, you have the Shoal version, which is the more popular right now. But this was the deck that I saw popping up every now and again. And I intended on doing a deck guide on, but really didn't get into it. And this is Azorius humans. Now, you still get to do the Ether Vial opening nonsense along with, Hopeful Initiate, Esper Sentinel, Champion the Parish. You get to do Guardian of Benalia, which allows you to scry and then discard a card. Give it indestructible. I'm not sure why they're playing this one. Thalia's Lieutenant allows you to, obviously grow your creatures. Honestly, Ambitious Farmhand, okay, kind of understand this one. If I were building this deck, it would probably have Thalia in it instead of Guardian of New Benalia. Lavinia makes some amount of sense in the main deck. Can really tax the opponent's ability to cast certain spells, especially Cascade decks. Very good hate game 1, plus it's a 2/2 bear. Unsettled Mariner really makes it miserable for your opponent to cast spells. Whenever you or a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 1. Thoughtseize costs an extra 1. Searing Blades costs an extra 2. And these things can stack. So, really annoying card to play against. Annoying Peacekeeper, good way to disrupt your opponent. Brutal Gathar, kind of a Solitude-esque removal spell, except if it dies, the creature comes back. Distraction Specialist as a way to kind of get into the grindier games, and then Adeline as a way to pressure your opponent. Sideboard, we've seen most of these cards. Kataki War's Wage, very good against decks like Affinity, Hammer. Anything that's playing a bunch of artifacts really taxes their ability to use their mana. Primarily bringing this in probably against Hammer Time and such. Containment Priest, we've already kind of talked about, along with Lauren, or Lauren of the Third Path. Then March of Otherworldly Light. Unfortunately, there isn't as many of these versions running around now that Mono White's kind of popped up. The newer deck lists of Azorius has kind of dried up a little bit. But if I were building this list, I'd probably run some number of actual Thalia Guardian of Thraben. No reason to be running Guardian of the new Benalia. I wonder if that is maybe a typo from the original list, because this feels like this should be 4 Thalias. Ambitious Farmhand at least makes sense. You know, get you a land, you can transform it into a powerful 3/3 lifelinker. So that at least makes a little bit more sense in terms of, you know, hitting your land drops, casting your spells, etc. But I really think these Guardians of New Benalia were probably Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, and it was just an error on MTG and Goldfish would be my guess, or whoever entered the deck. But, you know, could have been Guardian of New Benalia, but I don't see any reason really to have played this card. And that is Modern Humans. Deck overall obviously fell off because of a lot of the new Modern Horizons cards, you know, Fury, Solitude. Struggled in the Omnath meta a little bit. Omnath Uro could be really annoying, although it did have Reflector Mage and stuff to kind of fight through them. But, you know, still a deck that kind of struggles in Battle Cruiser Magic. You know, and when you have decks that are running, you know, Fury, Blink Fury, you have decks that are doing what Hammer Time does, etc. Humans was in a rough spot, so it definitely had to adapt and change. And, you know, any type of tribal deck in general has just struggled since Modern Horizons 2. There are a few decks out there that survived. Yawgmoth has done well. Hammer Time. But in general, creature decks, especially the tribal variants, you know, spirits, humans, merfolk, they pop up every now and again when maybe the format softens a little bit towards creatures, or some new innovation pops up like Shoal for this version. But overall, Humans has been in a rough place, but certainly a deck we could try out some here or there, and a deck that I had many war with as a Burn Mage, and I'm sad to see it go, but also it could be a very miserable matchup as a Burn Mage. So, hate to see it go, but don't really want to see it come back, especially since it's a white deck that can play Sanctifiers and Forged Tenders and Thalias and Unsettled Mariners and all this stuff. But, yeah. Definitely an interesting deck, a deck that you should be aware of as a modern player, a deck you might see if somebody pulls it out of storage at some point or tries the new Shoal version, but not a deck that is currently a tier deck, but still a deck that has that potential. And who knows, maybe someday it will return to the upper echelons of Modern. If you like these kind of deck guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hope to see you for our next video.